as I said, we will get to those local election results in just a moment. But first, let's talk about Keir Starmer. More allegations in the newspapers this morning. The Sunday Times claiming that sources say Keir Starmer didn't do work after eating, as he claimed. The Mail on Sunday has got a leaked memo, which it claims shows the event and the curry was planned in advance, this dinner in Miners Hall with Mary Foy, the candidate. Now, Labour, of course, say no rules are broken. They're happy to answer any questions. So can you just tell us exactly what happened? You know, was the event planned in advance? Was work done afterwards? What actually went on?
Well, I think this note, the operations note that the Mail on Sunday has got hold of, demonstrates exactly what went on, was exactly what Keir Starmer has said went on. He went on a work visit. He stopped to eat at various times during the day, as was factored into the work visit. And then he finished the work visit and he went back to his hotel. I think the last few weeks we've seen an absolutely desperate attempt to sling mud at the Labour leader and various members of the Labour Party, and it is frankly absurd of the Tories to claim that this in any way equates to a Prime Minister who was under investigation by the police for 12 separate gatherings, which included karaoke parties, bring your own bottle parties, pub quizzes, suitcases full of wine being smuggled through the back door. And the Prime Minister lied about that. He denied that they happened. He denied that he was there. He came clean and he laughed about it. Keir Starmer went on a work visit and had a break to eat. The idea that this is the same sort of thing is just a sign of a government that is tired, is desperate and is completely out of ideas, that spends more time slinging mud at the Labour Party than working out how they're going to deal with pensioners who are now struggling so much to heat their homes that they're having to get on buses in order to avoid the cold. It's about time that this government just gave up with this desperate attempt and went for the sake of this country.
OK, well, let's just put to one side any comparisons with Boris Johnson or what happened in number 10 Downing Street. Let's just put that to one side. Keir Starmer is being investigated by the police about whether or not he broke the law. If they find that he broke the law, should he resign?
Look, I'm not going to get into that because I'm absolutely confident that he hasn't broken the law.
But
he was
why
investigated.
Won't you get into it? I genuinely, sorry, I had to interrupt you, but I am struggling to understand why nobody will engage in this legitimate question when Keir Starmer is literally under investigation by the police. If you're so confident, I understand that. You know, if Labour says, look, we're absolutely confident no rules were broken. If they were, of course he'll resign. But, you know, why don't you just be clear on what that is? I don't understand.
Because it lends legitimacy to something that is completely and utterly absurd, that is a desperate attempt by the government to deflect from the fact that we've got the highest inflation rate in a generation and people are struggling to survive. And I'm not going to entertain it because I'm absolutely confident that no rules were broken, not least because this was investigated last time the Conservatives tried to sling mud at us and Keir Starmer was found to be completely in the clear. This is a guy who self-isolated 6 times during the pandemic. I don't know a single other person who did that. He is Mr. Rules. He does not break the rules. He was the Director of Public Prosecutions, not somebody who goes round tearing up rules when it suits him. In stark contrast to the Prime Minister, I have to say, I think this desperate attempt to sling mud will fall flat, but I think we'll see more of this as we get closer to a general election because the one thing that the Conservatives don't want to talk about is what is actually happening to people in this country right now, and that's what we're focused on.
The easiest way to shut down these questions and to focus on the issues you want is just to give a straight answer about what would happen if Durham police find Mr. Rules did break the rules. And we know, of course, why we're talking about this, because he has been, as you say, very strong in criticising the government and in calling on them to resign. I just want to look at a tweet from Keir Starmer at the end of January. After months of denials, the Prime Minister is now under criminal investigation for breaking his own lockdown laws. He needs to do the decent thing and resign. Now, the crucial thing about this is the date. This is before any fines were issued. Your leader is now under investigation for breaking lockdown laws. Surely, if you have his own standards applied to him, then Keir Starmer needs to resign just for being under investigation.
But Sophie, look, I've already answered that question. That tweet, that call for Boris Johnson to resign, was at a time when the Prime Minister was under investigation for 12 separate gatherings at Downing Street, which he denied for months had even happened, let alone that he was there, and only came clean when he was caught red-handed. that included karaoke parties, bring your own bottle parties, leaving drinks, celebration drinks, suitcases full of wine being smuggled in through the back door of Downing Street. It is absurd to equate that to a work visit with planned breaks to eat. It was not illegal to eat. And the longer that this goes on, the reason that we're talking about it is not because Labour won't answer a straight answer. The reason we're talking about it is because this government is desperate and they are throwing mud at the Labour Party to deflect from their own failings in the country. And the longer that we talk about this and the less that we talk about what is happening to people in the country, the more it fuels the sense that politicians are out of touch. And that's what Boris Johnson wants. And we're determined not to allow him to do it.
OK, you're very clear in your answers that you don't think Keir Starmer will be found guilty. If he does, it is hard to see how he could potentially stay on as leader. If the ball, to coin a phrase, did come loose at the back of the scrum, would you fancy have another crack at the leadership?
Look, I stood to be leader of the Labour Party because I believe that our nations and regions across Britain had been fundamentally underserved for decades and we needed to turn that around. We need to get good jobs back into towns like Wigan and across the country, and we need to start putting money in people's pockets and rebuilding our communities. That's the job that Keir Starmer has handed me. And for 12 years, I've just watched with absolute desperation as the Tories have visited misery on people across this country. That's why we've got to get into government and we've got to turn this around. You saw on Thursday that we're starting to do that we're starting to fight our way back in communities where people said it just wasn't possible only 3 years ago. And in a couple of years' time, that is our responsibility. We've got to be in government, get rid of this tired, desperate government and start to turn around the fortunes of the people in this country.
That sounded a little bit like another leadership pitch to me.
It's a pitch to the country that we need a Labour government led by Keir Starmer in a couple of years' time that is going to be able to get money back into people's pockets, deal with the immediate crisis and start to rebuild this country from the ground up. This country cannot afford more of the Conservatives, and there is absolutely no question in my mind that we can't muck around with internal debates in the Labour Party about who's up and who's down. We've got a leader who, even in these last few days, with huge amounts of mud being slung at him, has come out of this showing the same honesty and character and grit that he's shown all the way through during the leadership contest when we were competitors and since. And we are absolutely determined that we're going to stand together, fight together and win the future of this country together.
OK. Now, I am keen to talk about the local election results. We spoke to Dominic Raab about the difficult performance the Conservatives had. But I just want to look at Labour because I accept that, progress was made in some areas by Labour, but you actually lost vote share in every part of the country apart from London. You also gained fewer seats than the Lib Dems and the Green Party in England. We're looking at the graph now. Labour putting on 28 seats in England. That's compared to 191 for the Lib Dems and the 61 for the Green Party. I mean, it's pretty clear, isn't it, by these results that people are unhappy with the Conservatives, but they're not necessarily just coming to Labour. Why not?
Well, 3 years ago, I came on your show after we'd just lost our entire Labour base in every nation and region of the UK. And I think you could see that it was clear. I honestly didn't know if that break, that decisive break that people had made with us was going to be permanent. These are parts of the country where, like Bury, like Rossendale, like parts of Cumbria, where once we were them and they were us, and that break was painful, and I wasn't sure if it was going to be permanent. I think Thursday showed the opposite, actually. I think it showed that the path back to power for Labour is steep, but it doesn't have to be long. And we're making progress in every region and nation now, in Scotland, in Wales and in England, in parts of the country where, I watched us lose Labour MPs, I watched us lose good people, and I wondered if we'd ever repair that damage. We did start to repair that damage on Thursday. This was the turning point for us, and I'm absolutely determined now that this is a start, not the end, that we now get on the front foot to convince people that we're not just an effective opposition who've won the right to be heard, but we are a genuine alternative to this awful Tory government that can actually start to deliver on the things that people care about, like getting money back into people's pockets through a windfall tax, like investing in good jobs in every community in this country. We've started to set that out, but you're going to see a lot more of that from me, from Keir, from Rachel Reeves and others over the next few months.
Do you think Labour needs to be much more bold, then, in the policy platform to deal with the cost of living crisis that's coming down the road?
I think we've been pretty bold so far. We struck out at the last Labour Party conference by promising to invest $28 billion a year every year over the next decade in good, clean jobs in communities that have seen jobs bleeding out of those communities for the last 40 years. I think, we have a lot of debate in the Labour Party about whether to be radical. I think the key is to be relevant. People need money in their pockets right now. That's why we're calling for a windfall tax on the big oil and gas producers. We need to get that money back into the pockets, not just because families and businesses are struggling to survive, but because it's a nonsense to say, as Michael Gove is saying, that you can start to rebuild our economies and rebuild our high streets and town centres if people simply don't have money to spend. We care about the same things that people in this country care about. They're not getting a hearing at the moment in the media or the political debate, and it's our job to make sure that they do.
OK, I'm keen to talk to you about the situation in Northern Ireland as well, with Sinn Féin winning that historic victory in those Assembly elections. Now, Mary Lou McDonald, the president of Sinn Féin, has already started talking about the possibility of a border poll, saying a referendum could be possible within a 5-year timeframe. What is the Labour Party's position on a border poll in Northern Ireland?
Well, look, we believe in the United Kingdom. We're not neutral about that. We fought for and will strive for and argue for the future of the United Kingdom for as long as we exist. We respect the Good Friday Agreement, and we would play our role in government as an honest broker in that. But look, I think these elections in Northern Ireland are historic and they are significant. It's very clear that people were voting for change in the last set of elections, but that does not equate to voting to trigger a border poll. The Good Friday Agreement is absolutely clear that there has to be a clear majority for that in Northern Ireland before that is triggered, and I don't think that those conditions have in any sense been met. Most of the major parties, including Sinn Féin, fought these elections on the cost of living crisis that is engulfing people in Northern Ireland just as it's engulfing people across the United Kingdom. We'll support Sinn Féin in their aim to get the executive up and running as quickly as possible. They hope to do that next week, and then to start focusing on the things that they won this election on, which is the cost of living crisis and getting money back into people's pockets.
And just finally, there's some real concerns about the ability to actually form an executive at all, with the DUP saying that they're prepared to collapse the power sharing arrangement, refuse to join an executive until the Northern Ireland Protocol is dealt with. Now, Dominic Raab earlier on the show said that it needs to be dealt with as soon as possible. What do you think needs to happen?
We've long been calling for a veterinary agreement that would help to break down some of those borders and barriers that currently exist because of the Northern Ireland Protocol that Boris Johnson negotiated. I think on a broader point, at any time in the history of Northern Ireland, recent history, when there's been a problem, it has usually fallen to the British Prime Minister to try to use his or her personal authority to bring sides together and to negotiate through this. The difficulty that we find ourselves in now is that Boris Johnson is not seen as an honest broker. He is the person who helped to write the architecture of this problem rather than resolve it. I think the key over the next couple of weeks for the government is that they've got to get on and resolve these issues around the Northern Ireland Protocol, because at the moment, I have to say, the lack of trust in the Prime Minister himself is part of what is fueling this crisis in Northern Ireland. So get that agreement in place, yes, and the nuts and bolts of it, but also Boris Johnson has a lot of work to do, I think, to prove to people in Northern Ireland that he can be trusted.